Charleston, South Carolina, 1991. The air hung thick and heavy, a familiar, suffocating cloak of heat and humidity that settled over the historic city like a second skin. It seeped into the very bones of the old buildings, clung to the Spanish moss dangling from ancient live oaks, and made every breath feel like drawing in a warm, wet sponge. Cobblestone streets, the pastel hues of Rainbow Row, and the incessant hum of cicadas usually painted a picture of idyllic southern charm for the postcard-wielding tourists. But for those like Sarah Jenkins, living beyond the manicured gardens and sun-drenched promenades, Charleston held a different, more demanding reality. It was a city of hard work, tight-knit communities, and the quiet, often unseen, struggles of everyday life, where survival sometimes felt like a full-time job. Sarah Jenkins knew that reality intimately. At 29, she was a woman carved from resilience, a single mother to two vibrant children. 8-year-old Emily, sharp-witted and fiercely protective, with her mother's determined chin, and 6-year-old Michael, a sandy-haired boy with an infectious giggle and an imagination that soared, his eyes constantly searching for wonder. Sarah worked 2, sometimes 3, jobs to keep their small, 2-bedroom bungalow on the city's North Charleston side afloat. Days were spent serving sweet tea, shrimp and grits, and slices of pecan pie at the Salty Crab Diner, her feet aching by closing, her smile often feeling like a practiced muscle. Evenings, after rushing home to put the kids to bed with stories and prayers, often involved cleaning offices downtown, a solitary, weary trek across the city on the late bus, the humid night air offering little relief but the quiet hum of the engine. Her life was a relentless, exhausting cycle of work, school runs, dinner preparations, laundry, and fleeting moments of joy squeezed in between. She dreamed of a life beyond the grind, maybe opening a small bakery, a place where her grandmother's secret lemon pound cake recipe could finally shine, filling the air with the comforting scent of citrus and sugar. She harbored a secret ambition to take a night class at the technical college, maybe in business or accounting, anything to lift her family just a little higher. For now, though, her focus was acutely, fiercely on Emily and Michael. They were her world, her reason for every scraped knee endured, every extra shift taken, and every tired sigh swallowed. Their laughter was her currency, their dreams her only investment. The morning of June 18, 1991, a Tuesday, began like any other. The sun was already a searing promise in the hazy sky as Sarah hustled the kids through breakfast. Michael was recounting, in vivid detail, a dream about a one-eyed pirate and a treasure chest full of gummy bears, while Emily, ever the pragmatist, reminded him to eat his cereal before it got soggy and unappetizing. Sarah, despite the early hour, packed their school lunches with care: homemade peanut butter and jelly sandwiches cut diagonally, crisp apples, and a juice box for each. She kissed their foreheads, a familiar, warm ritual, before dropping them off at North Charleston Elementary. "Be good for Mrs. Evans, you two," she'd called out, watching their small figures disappear into the imposing brick building, 2 bright spots against the mundane backdrop of a bustling school morning, completely unaware it would be the last time she saw them for a very long time. Her shift at the Salty Crab started at 9 a.m. She clocked in, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, exchanged pleasantries with her colleague Brenda, a woman with a booming laugh and an equally booming heart, and began setting tables, the clatter of silverware and the scent of stale coffee a familiar symphony. The day passed in a blur of taking orders, refilling sweet tea, and exchanging small talk with the eclectic mix of regulars and curious tourists. Around 3 p.m., she took her scheduled break, stepping out into the oppressive, sticky heat, fumbling for a cigarette in her apron pocket, and leaning against the diner's sun-baked brick wall. Brenda joined her a few minutes later, offering a sympathetic shrug and a shared sigh. "Another one for the books, huh, Sar? This heat's gonna melt my brain." Sarah managed a tired, wistful smile, taking a drag from her cigarette. "Tell me about it, just gotta make it to the weekend. Kids are talking about going to Folly Beach if I can swing it." She finished her shift promptly at 5 p.m. Instead of heading straight home, she had a quick, necessary errand. Pick up a prescription for Emily's seasonal allergies at the Eckerd Pharmacy on Rivers Avenue. Emily had been sneezing all morning, and Sarah couldn't stand to see her uncomfortable. She had promised the kids she'd be home by 6 to make their absolute favorite, her special recipe for spaghetti and meatballs, before they settled down to watch the Cosby Show rerun, a weekly ritual. It was a simple plan, a typical Tuesday evening. But when 6:30 p.m. rolled around and Sarah still hadn't arrived, Emily, who usually possessed an uncanny, almost telepathic sense of her mother's punctuality, started to worry. She fidgeted on the sofa, glancing at the old wall clock every few minutes. Michael, however, was blissfully oblivious, engrossed in the epic battle between his Lego knights and a rogue dinosaur. Mrs. Evans, their kind, elderly neighbor and a dear friend of Sarah's, who was watching the children until Sarah returned, tried her best to reassure Emily. "She's probably just stuck in traffic, sweetie. You know how it gets on rivers Ave this time of day. It's a mess." But as the minutes turned into an hour and then two, Mrs. Evans felt a cold, prickling knot of pure unease tightening in her stomach. Sarah was never late, not like this, not without a call. She called the Salty Crab, but Sarah had already clocked out at 5 p.m. sharp. She called the Eckerd Pharmacy. A harried clerk checked the records and confirmed there was no record of Sarah Jenkins picking up a prescription that day. She called Sarah's older sister, Brenda Jenkins, not the same Brenda from work, but a woman with Sarah's same fierce spirit, living across town in West Ashley. Brenda said she hadn't heard from Sarah all day, and her voice quickly rose in alarm. "This isn't like her, Mrs. Evans, not Sarah." By 9 p.m., with the children finally asleep, their small faces peaceful in slumber despite the growing tension in the house, Mrs. Evans made the difficult, dreaded call to the North Charleston Police Department. The officer on the other end was polite, his voice measured but undeniably dismissive. "Ma'am, it's only been a few hours. A woman her age, she's probably just out with friends or with a new beau. Happens all the time. She'll turn up." The implication was clear. Sarah was not considered a vulnerable victim, but a grown woman exercising her independence, perhaps irresponsibly. Brenda, Sarah's sister, arrived shortly after, her face etched with a desperate worry that quickly morphed into anger. "Sarah wouldn't just leave her kids, Mrs. Evans, not ever. She lives for those children." Brenda insisted on filing a missing persons report immediately, but the police reiterated their stance, advising them to wait 24 hours. It wasn't until the next morning, nearly 18 agonizing hours after Sarah was last seen, that they reluctantly agreed to file a report. Even then, the tone was one of bureaucratic routine, not genuine urgency. The initial impression was already set, another adult choosing to disappear. The initial investigation was, to Brenda's exasperated eyes and ears, agonizingly slow, frustratingly superficial, and riddled with a lack of serious commitment. Officers visited Sarah's small bungalow, noting its tidy, lived-in appearance. No signs of forced entry, no struggle, nothing overtly amiss. Her worn leather purse, containing her meager cash, driver's license, and keys, was missing. Her car, a beat-up, pale blue 1982 Ford Fairmont with a perpetually rusty fender, was also gone from its usual spot in the driveway. It was a common sight on Charleston streets, a forgettable car in a city full of them, blending seamlessly into the everyday traffic. Detectives interviewed Brenda from the Salty Crab, who confirmed Sarah left at 5 p.m. The pharmacist at Eckerd still couldn't recall Sarah specifically, citing the sheer volume of customers. Neighbors, mostly elderly and keeping to themselves, hadn't seen anything unusual, just the usual comings and goings. The prevailing narrative that began to circulate, subtly encouraged by initial police apathy and fueled by small-town gossip, was that Sarah, a single mother struggling to make ends meet, had simply decided to start a new life, leaving her responsibilities and her children behind. It was a narrative as cruel as it was convenient for a strained police department. This insidious narrative was a fresh, deep cut to Brenda and especially to Emily, who, with her perceptive ears, overheard whispered conversations at school and in the grocery store. "My mom wouldn't do that," Emily would fiercely declare, tears welling in her eyes, her small fists clenched, defending a mother she knew was loyal to a fault, a mother who lived for them. Brenda, already shouldering the crushing weight of her own grief and fear, took the children in, becoming their primary caregiver, navigating the bewildering, heartbreaking task of explaining their mother's inexplicable absence to two confused, heartbroken kids. Michael, still young enough to grasp only fragments of the tragedy, kept asking, his voice small and hopeful, "When's Mommy making spaghetti again?" Brenda, fueled by a potent mix of love and fury, took matters into her own hands. She spent her evenings and weekends tirelessly printing flyers, crude black and white photos of Sarah's bright, smiling face, distributing them across North Charleston, pasting them on lamp posts, in convenience stores, at bus stops, and even on the bulletin boards of laundromats. Each flyer screamed the desperate plea, "Missing, Sarah Jenkins. Last seen June 18, 1991. If you have any information, please call." She called local news stations, begging them to cover the story with the urgency it deserved. A small blurb eventually appeared in the Post and Courier. A week later, buried deep in the local section, quickly overshadowed by other, more sensational headlines. The story of a missing working-class mother simply wasn't deemed newsworthy enough to warrant prime attention. The weeks bled into agonizing months. Summer's oppressive heat gave way to the crisp, breezy air of fall, then the damp chill of a Charleston winter. Sarah's car, the humble Ford Fairmont, was eventually found, nearly 3 months after her disappearance, abandoned in a remote, overgrown parking lot behind an old, disused warehouse near the Cooper River, several miles from her home. It was discovered by a group of teenagers exploring the derelict area, looking for a secluded spot. When the North Charleston Police Department finally processed the vehicle, weeks after its discovery, owing to a backlog and a perceived lack of urgency, they found no significant forensic evidence. No fingerprints that didn't belong to Sarah, no signs of a struggle, no blood. It appeared to have been meticulously wiped clean, or perhaps simply left untouched by anyone else. The car's discovery offered no answers, only deepened the mystery and intensified Brenda's gnawing frustration. It was a puzzle piece that fit nowhere. The case went cold, officially closing its active investigation status by early 1992. The initial lack of immediate resources, the implicit bias against a young, working-class single mother, and the frustrating absence of clear, compelling leads combined to render Sarah Jenkins another tragic statistic in the city's burgeoning missing persons files. The detectives initially assigned to the case moved on to more pressing, more solvable crimes, their files transferred to the cavernous archives. Brenda, however, refused to let Sarah fade into oblivion. She became a tireless, relentless advocate, a one-woman army against forgetfulness. She contacted private investigators she absolutely couldn't afford, wrote countless letters to state representatives, even in moments of sheer, desperate hopelessness visited psychics, though she knew Sarah, ever the pragmatist, would have scoffed at the very idea. She kept Sarah's bungalow exactly as it was, a silent, poignant shrine to a life brutally interrupted, meticulously dusting, hoping against hope that one day, Sarah would simply walk through the door, offering an explanation, a smile, a hug. Emily and Michael grew up under Brenda's loving but increasingly burdened care. Emily, now a quiet, thoughtful teenager, carried the heavy, unspoken weight of her mother's absence, a shadow that stretched across her adolescence. Michael, though younger, understood the deep, aching void left in their lives. The children remembered their mother's laugh, her warm, enveloping hugs, the comforting aroma of her spaghetti and meatballs, but the memories began to fray at the edges, becoming distant echoes, more dream than reality. 10 years later, the year is 2001, Charleston has changed as all cities do. The skyline boasts new developments, the population has swelled, sprawling outwards, yet its historic heart, with its ancient charm and undercurrents of forgotten stories, remains. Emily is now 18, a bright, determined student enrolled at the College of Charleston, majoring in English, a scholarship student dreaming of a future unbound by past sorrows. Michael is 16, navigating the turbulent waters of high school, a quiet, introspective boy with a strong artistic streak, often found sketching the cityscapes and marshlands his mother had loved, a silent tribute. Brenda, now in her late 50s, is weary, her once vibrant spirit tempered by a decade of unanswered questions and the crushing weight of a family left incomplete, but her fierce resolve remains unbroken, a flickering ember in the darkness. She still holds out hope, a fragile, persistent belief in justice. The old bungalow still stands, meticulously maintained by Brenda, a testament to enduring love and unresolved grief. Sarah's room remains untouched, a heartbreaking time capsule, her perfume on the dresser, a half-read book on the nightstand, her favorite blue dress hanging in the closet. The North Charleston Police Department has new faces, new technologies, nascent internet searches, more sophisticated DNA analysis, improved forensic techniques, but Sarah's file rests in the cold case archives, a thick, yellowing binder gathering dust on a forgotten shelf, a testament to a life deemed unsolvable. Then on a sweltering July afternoon in 2001, a phone call, sharp and insistent, shattered the quiet, melancholic routine of the Jenkins family. It was Detective Thomas O'Malley, a fresh face on the North Charleston PD's cold case unit, a man in his late 30s with an earnest gaze and a reputation for dogged persistence. Unlike his predecessors, O'Malley was determined to revisit the city's forgotten shadows, to pick at the threads of old mysteries. Miss Jenkins, O'Malley's voice was calm, professional, but held an undeniable tremor of urgency that sent a shiver down Brenda's spine, despite the heat. "We have a development regarding Sarah's case." Brenda's heart, long accustomed to a steady, muted ache, leaped into her throat, hammering against her ribs. A decade of silence had conditioned her to expect nothing, to protect herself from the bitter sting of false hope. "What kind of development, detective?" she managed, her voice barely a whisper, afraid to breathe. O'Malley explained, his words carefully chosen, each one landing with heavy finality. "A construction crew excavating a new commercial development site near the Cooper River, not far from where Sarah's car had been found 10 years prior, had unearthed something profoundly disturbing. What they initially thought were old, rusted pipes or forgotten industrial debris turned out, upon closer inspection, to be human remains. Buried shallowly, tangled amongst the resilient roots of a stubborn palmetto and compacted soil, a skeleton had slowly emerged, exposed by the relentless churn of heavy machinery. Forensics teams had been called in immediately. The location, the approximate depth of the burial, the era of the clothing fragments found intertwined with the remains, a faded floral pattern that Brenda vaguely remembered Sarah wearing, all pointed to a harrowing, undeniable connection. Dental records, painstakingly preserved from Sarah's old family dentist, were needed for definitive identification. The next few days were an agonizing, unbearable blur for Brenda, Emily, and Michael. Emily, now a self-possessed adult, accompanied Brenda to the grim, sterile environment of the police station, her face pale but resolute. Michael, still too young to fully grasp the gruesome implications of what they were being told, waited at home, sketching furiously in his notebook, his charcoal smudging the pages, his art a desperate, silent outlet for his unspoken fears and sorrow. The confirmation came 3 days later on a humid Friday morning. The dental records matched. The remains were positively identified as Sarah Jenkins. The news ripped through the family like a fresh, brutal wound, tearing open scars that had never truly healed. The decade of uncertainty, the imagined scenarios, the slim, tenacious hope of her one day simply returning, all of it was extinguished in a single, devastating, brutal confirmation. Sarah was gone. She hadn't left them. She had been taken violently and unjustly, the world tilted on its axis. Detective O'Malley, a meticulous and empathetic investigator who recognized the profound injustice of a cold case, reopened the file with a renewed, fierce vigor. The discovery of Sarah's body transformed the investigation from a forgotten missing person to a full-blown homicide. The initial apathy surrounding her disappearance now felt like a profound institutional failure, a stain on the department's record. The new forensic capabilities of 2001, though not as advanced as today's cutting-edge science, were still a significant leap from the rudimentary techniques available in 1991. The site where Sarah's remains were found was meticulously combed over, piece by agonizing piece. But a decade of relentless weather, natural erosion, and unchecked construction activity had obliterated most useful, perishable evidence. Still, amidst the debris, a few small, critical fragments of a distinctive, coarse fabric, not belonging to Sarah, were painstakingly recovered. They were barely visible, clinging to a root. O'Malley re-interviewed everyone, meticulously going back through the original, sparse reports. Brenda from the salty crab, the elusive pharmacist, the reticent neighbors, Sarah's former colleagues. He even located Sarah's ex-partner, David Miller, the biological father of Emily and Michael. Miller, a volatile man with a history of minor arrests for public intoxication and domestic disturbances, had been largely dismissed in the initial investigation, seen as a deadbeat dad but not a murderer, too disorganized for such an act. He had an alibi for June 18, 1991, albeit a shaky one. He claimed to be working an overnight shift at a local dive bar, the Copper Penny, though no one could definitively corroborate his exact hours or even if he showed up at all. O'Malley saw him differently this time, through the lens of a new tragedy. A man who harbored resentment, who knew Sarah's movements, who could have followed her, fueled by alcohol and bitterness. He was a suspect, but the new evidence pointed elsewhere. The investigation now shifted focus dramatically. With Sarah's body finally found, the convenient narrative of a runaway had utterly vanished. Now, the chilling, unyielding question was, who silenced her and why? O'Malley delved deep into Sarah's past, unearthing old relationships, minor disputes, any potential enemies she might have unwittingly made. He discovered Sarah had a brief, tumultuous, and secret relationship with a man named Robert Hayes in the months leading up to her disappearance. Hayes was a transient, a rough-around-the-edges handyman who worked odd jobs around Charleston, often frequenting the areas near the Cooper River, places where he could disappear into the shadows. He had left town abruptly, without a trace, a few weeks after Sarah vanished, leaving no forwarding address, no goodbyes. The initial investigation had only briefly noted his existence, dismissing him as another fleeting acquaintance in Sarah's complicated life. In 2001, finding someone who had been off the grid for a decade was a daunting, near impossible task, even with nascent digital tools. O'Malley tracked down old associates of Hayes, checked parole records, and scoured public databases, a slow, painstaking process that stretched over months. Every lead seemed to hit a dead end, every phone number disconnected. Months passed again. Emily started her sophomore year at college, Michael his senior year of high school. The raw pain of Sarah's death was ever present, but the tenacious hope for justice now provided a new, desperate focus for the family. Then, a break, small but significant. A routine traffic violation in rural Georgia, nearly 300 miles away. Robert Hayes, now older, heavier, his face more weathered, but undeniably the same man from the grainy 1991 mugshot, had been pulled over for a broken taillight. His fingerprints, taken during the stop and immediately entered into a national database, finally provided a match. A cross-reference with old, archived prints from a minor assault charge Hayes had faced in Charleston years before Sarah's disappearance definitively linked him to the city and its past. Detective O'Malley immediately put out an interstate alert. Hayes was apprehended swiftly in a small Georgia town, working under the table at a greasy roadside diner, living in a dilapidated trailer park. He was brought back to Charleston for questioning, a ghost from the past dragged into the harsh light of the present. The interrogation was intense, stretching over 2 days, a psychological battle of wills. Hayes initially denied everything, his eyes darting, his story rehearsed. He claimed he hadn't seen Sarah Jenkins in months before she disappeared, that he'd simply moved on, seeking work elsewhere. But O'Malley, patient and relentless, presented him with the new, irrefutable evidence. Sarah's body, found precisely where Hayes had frequented, the distinctive fabric fragments found near her remains that, thanks to new techniques, matched fibers meticulously recovered from Hayes's old abandoned trailer, which had been foreclosed on and emptied years ago, but some forgotten items remained in storage by the landlord. The fragments were minuscule, easily overlooked or dismissed in 1991, but crucial with 2001's improved forensic analysis. Under the unyielding pressure, the carefully constructed facade began to crack, then crumble. Hayes eventually confessed, his voice a low, mumbled drone, his eyes fixed on the grimy floor. He admitted to seeing Sarah on June 18, 1991. They had argued violently near the Cooper River in that secluded, abandoned lot. Sarah had ended their brief, secret affair, wanting to focus solely on her children, to simplify her life. He had reacted with a sudden, uncontrollable fit of jealous rage. He had strangled her, buried her shallowly amongst the roots and debris, and then wiped down her car with an old rag, leaving it to be discovered days or weeks later, hoping it would simply be seen as an abandonment by a troubled woman. He fled Charleston shortly after, convinced he had gotten away with it, that the city would forget Sarah Jenkins. The motive was tragically, heartbreakingly mundane: a rejected man, a sudden, explosive burst of uncontrolled anger and male entitlement. No grand conspiracy, no shadowy figures, no intricate plot. Just a moment of raw human weakness and shocking brutality that stole a mother from her children, leaving a gaping wound that festered for a decade. The confession brought a chilling, undeniable closure, but absolutely no comfort. Sarah Jenkins had finally found justice, but her children had lost a decade of agonizing uncertainty only to gain a horrifying, gruesome truth. Emily and Michael, now poised on the cusp of adulthood, attended the trial, their faces stoic, their grief profound. Hayes received a life sentence, vanishing into the labyrinthine prison system, a forgotten specter of the past, his name gradually erased from the city's collective memory. The Jenkins family, however, was left with the devastating aftermath, the irreparable damage of a life violently taken. The quiet, hopeful ache in Brenda's heart was replaced by a heavy, sorrowful certainty, a burden she would carry forever. Emily and Michael grew up, carrying the indelible, invisible mark of their mother's violent death. They lived full lives, graduating college, finding careers, building their own families. Emily became a teacher, instilling in her students a love for literature, always remembering her mother's dreams. Michael became a respected artist, his works often imbued with a subtle melancholy, reflections of the beauty and tragedy he'd witnessed. But the ghost of Sarah Jenkins, the vibrant, loving mother who loved spaghetti and meatballs, who dreamed of a bakery who was taken too soon, would forever linger in the humid Charleston air, a poignant, whispered reminder of a life tragically cut short and the enduring, often delayed, fight for justice. The city moved on, its cobblestones silent witnesses to countless stories, some of them, like Sarah's, bearing the grim weight of a mystery finally solved, 10 years too late, leaving an indelible mark on the soul of a community.